There comes a time in a man's life where he needs to make a video on a game even though there's already like 30,000 retrospectives and analyses on it. I mean, I've replayed Ocarina of Time more times than I can count, and if somebody made a 23-minute video on this bouncing skull in the well, hell, I'd probably watch it. Anyway, I want to talk about Thieve today. Not because I'm privy to some rare development information or that my analysis is more valuable than anyone else's, but because Thieve kicks ass and it should probably be talked about. See, I try to talk about Thieve with my friends and I just get that blank stare back. I get it. It looks the way it does. It's a little cumbersome for somebody accustomed to modern games, and it doesn't really hold your hand either. Give it time though, let it work its magic. You'll find not only one of the best stealth games ever made, but one of the greatest games of all time. With certain genres, enough improvements have been made so it can be tough to go back. That's why I respect Thieve so damn much. It nailed stealth right out of the gate. Some games are revered for pioneering a genre, others because of their objective quality. Thieve is loved for both reasons. It showed up in '98 and said, "This is how it's done." Nobody has taken that belt, at least not in my opinion. Unless you grew up around the kind of people who were PC gaming enthusiasts all the way back in 1998, you probably didn't hear much about Thieve. '98 was a busy year for games, and commercially speaking, consoles hogged the spotlight. Yet, over the years, a kind of appreciation has been building for Looking Glass Studios' Thieve series. Nowadays, it's easy to find a lot of high-quality retrospectives and even documentaries about the game. It only took us like 2 generations of mediocre stealth games to appreciate the GOAT. Even though it may not be as widely known as other stealth series, Thieve fans have an undying love and appreciation for these games. Thieve 1 and 2 are generally considered to be masterpieces, uncontested. The follow-up, Deadly Shadows, was a bit more divisive at launch, but over the years it certainly found some fans too. The future of the series was thrown into disarray after its owner, EIDOS, was purchased by evil neo-cyberpocalyptic megacorporation Square Enix back in 2009. A Thieve reboot was released sometime in 2014 that found mediocre critical acclaim and a scathing response from fans. Oftentimes with these large video game publishers, the future of a series is contingent on how well the previous game was received. So Thieve fans made their peace with the future of their beloved series and looked instead to spiritual successors such as Gloomwood to fill that void. However, the story has a twist ending. As of this review, EIDOS has recently been wrestled from the cold, miserable hands of Square Enix by a massive holding company called Embracer Group. With studios such as Deep Silver, 4A Games, and Piranha Bytes as subsidiaries, an ember of hope has been lit in the hearts of Thieve fans the world over.
Yippee!
The idea that passionate developers might have creative control over a new Thieve follow-up puts me in such a good mood that I gotta talk about Thieve while the iron's hot. The world of Thieve is unlike anything I've seen in a game. It takes place in the city, which is like a fantasy world I'd come up with as a kid, but good. And Sephiroth and Vash the Stampede aren't playable characters. And System of a Down isn't on the soundtrack. And the world is an amalgamation of low fantasy and steampunk. The city is undergoing an industrial revolution, with industry and metalwork spearheaded by a religious order called the Hammerites. At the same time, magic exists in several different forms as well. Unlike a lot of games with a technology-magic dichotomy, the two forces aren't actually in opposition here. There are magicians in the ranks of the Hammerites. I like this. In fantasy religion scenarios, you often expect the magic users to be persecuted by the overly litigious faction, but their working together complicates things a bit. The Hammerites worship a god known as the Master Builder, whose tenets reinforce order and progress by any means necessary. The Hammerites aren't definitively the bad guys. In fact, you'll have to ally with them at certain points on the main story, but their methods are certainly questionable. They're extremely harsh towards non-believers and libertarians. There's no doubt they're a force for progress in the city, but it doesn't look like that progress is improving the life of the average person. Most people in the city seem to live pretty destitute lives and don't follow the teachings of the Builder. Yet, with the Hammerites gaining influence and acting in an authoritarian way, it seems like life is bound to get worse for most. The antithesis to the Hammerites are the pagans. Far from practicing the structural and disciplinary measures of the Hammerites, the pagans represent unrestrained chaos. Their allegiance is to Mother Nature. They despise civilization and technology. They worship a god called the Trickster and follow the teachings of Ted Kaczynski. Both the Hammerites and the pagans were centered around a hierarchical structure with their respective gods on top, followed by priests or shamans, then warriors, and so on. Their opposition to each other provides the basis for the plot. What separates the original Thieve from its sequel is a focus on the dark and supernatural. Things begin pretty straightforwardly, but soon you'll be seeing all manner of ghosts, dinosaurs, and these wild and crazy guys. This is actually a point of contention for some people. Thieve's leaning into the occult and paranormal often takes the focus away from stealth and burglary, while making it feel more like a horror story. I can understand why some people have a problem with this, and for those who feel that way, they'll usually prefer Thieve 2, which is a much more grounded experience. But for my money, I like the horror stuff. On top of making an already unique game world even more wild, having these darker tones gives Thieve an identity all its own. It prevents the game from being made redundant with Thief 2 and allows both games to exist parallel to each other. Same core gameplay, but vastly different experiences tonally. Everybody has their favorite. All events of the story are experienced through the eyes and later eye of Garrett, who's about as cool as protagonists get.
Since I'm in here, I might as well pick up something for myself.
When Garrett was a child, he was inducted into an organization called the Keepers, who represent the third major faction of the city. Rather than being an active force for change in the city, the Keepers are meant to maintain balance. With the conflict between the Hammerites and the Pagans boiling over, they should have their work cut out for them, but Garrett decides to leave the Keepers behind and become an independent thief. No sense of responsibility for this guy, no respect for the power brokers who took him in. Even though he comes across as cynical and detached from politics, Garrett can't help but feel a vested interest in the fate of the city, forging unlikely alliances in an effort to weather the storm. The static between the Hammerites and the Pagans makes for an interesting central conflict, and a good excuse for us to travel around and experience the city. Not in a fun way though, like with selfie sticks and Royal Caribbean cruises, in a depressing way, like walking through sewers and beating women. World building is a bit non-traditional in Thief, with most information in the form of written notes or conversations heard while eavesdropping.
Sutter. It's me.
Security is necessary to prevent exposure and dilution of talent. Do you want to argue with the lords? Now what's the password?
Hand of shadow, foot of air. Open the door, okay?
Well, now he hasn't given me the password.
Are you taffing me?
There's a real organic quality to this type of exposition. Nobody needs to explain the city to Garrett, he's been steeped in it. But for us, the players, we need to care about what's happening, and the game handles this so smoothly you might not even notice you're learning about things. See, in most games there'd be some ridiculously on-the-nose dialogue like, "You know, Garrett, this conflict between the Hammerites and the Pagans is gonna destroy us thieves here in the city." "Right you are, old friend, things have changed since I left the Keepers, a powerful organization of scribes and scholars that secretly influence the balance of power." Yeah, Thief doesn't do that. It feeds you pieces of information about the city, only what's critical, naturally, while playing. It's pretty common in games to see this type of environmental storytelling used, but it was really clever and novel back in 1998. It's not to say there's no traditional storytelling at all though. You have animated cutscenes between levels, and man do I love these. They look so awesome. There's a really distinctive style that I've never seen replicated. A lot of scenes open up with tenets from the Hammerites or the Pagans, and there's this fitting, eerie, suspenseful music building up the gravity of what you're reading. I especially love the sound of the hammer hitting the anvil during one of the builder's quotes. The pagan quotes are written in this whimsical third-person style where suffixes are added like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, but the shit they have to hear is so creepy, the whimsy disappears into a black hole of evil. Following that, there'll be scenes that combine 2D animation with full motion video. It never looks cheesy like a lot of FMV stuff from this era. It combines a film noir style with horror and fantasy. Furthering that feeling of classic noir is Garrett's narration as he briefly describes the premise for the next mission.
Bafford, like most of his kind, probably keeps his treasures on the top floor of the place, close to his heart, and far from his servants.
The voice acting from Steven Russell is iconic. This man embodies the spirit of Garrett always and forever. Unless you ask Square Enix, they seem to think he's replaceable. The voice acting in general has its ups and downs, but Garrett's voice has aged remarkably well. You could slip him into a modern game and it wouldn't be the least bit out of place. Actually, they did do that with the Dishonored games. It's amazing what a talented voice actor can pull off. It's almost like they should voice characters in games rather than Hollywood celebrities phoning it in between bumps of cocaine.
Graduating, huh?
It's rare that I savor the opportunity to step away from the controls and let a cutscene play out, but that's exactly how I feel about Thief. It's a treat to watch these every single time. They're so stylish, they immerse you in the doom and gloom of the city and leave you with a perfect understanding of why Garrett became the cynical bastard that he is. I think the mark of really good game writing is when you're excited to learn more about the characters or the world, and that's what these cutscenes do for me. Like a lot of late 90s 3D games, Thief probably won't impress you on first glance. Yeah, the enemies have 5-sided faces, and the environmental geometry is a little little simple. What the Thief games hold on to after all these years are atmosphere. The lighting creates the perfect mood in these levels, and there's all these little flourishes like busted wagons or machinery that tell a story about the environment. Despite its age, I think there's something with the low-res photorealistic textures mapped onto these simplistic shapes that just feels eerie and surreal. It reminds me of dreams I had as a kid. In the city, everything feels suitably dark and depressing, but the interiors are actually really bright, almost gaudy sometimes. One room will feel like it's in a nobleman's mansion, and the next feels like my grandpa's house that was renovated in 1973. I've mentioned in other videos this feeling that early 3D games bring to mind. It's something I know is real but struggle to describe. Combination of visual elements creates a surreal feeling. I've heard it described as uncanny valley. Maybe that's it, but modern low-poly games don't quite capture the same feeling. It's an aesthetic experience forever trapped in the 90s. Outside of the art style, animation work is really extensive, especially for its time. I'll talk about the animations in more detail later, but suffice to say for now, they're very expressive in a time when 3D animation was going through nuclear puberty. If you're wondering why I didn't mention the soundtrack when I mentioned atmosphere, it's because I think it deserves its own special section. Yeah, you think I forgot? You think I'm stupid? The soundtrack is a masterpiece of dark ambience. If the purpose of a soundtrack is to serve the game, Eric Brosia's soundtrack for Thieve is like a French waiter with a silver platter full of garlic knots. It's dark, it's cold, it blends so seamlessly with the atmosphere of the game world that it becomes diegetic. It's like Garrett himself can hear the music too.
Mother of God, it's all toilet sounds.
The soundtrack platforms the game so perfectly that it becomes indistinguishable from the in-game sounds. Sometimes you'll turn around, swearing you heard something, only to find nothing there. The screams of inmates at Cragscleft prison or the tuning of an orchestra at the opera house. It's never quite clear where the soundtrack ends and the game world begins. They buttress each other, creating one of the most unique and evocative soundscapes in gaming. It's a soundtrack I can easily listen to while writing or working on something, but if you played each song individually, I could tell you which level it was from. I think that's damn impressive for an ambient soundtrack. It's not easy to create your own identity with ambience. Unless you're Brian Eno, that guy's magic or some shit, so I don't really think it's fair. Both the visual and sound design serve an important purpose, and one that's easy to overlook. In Thief, levels are separated into sections, even the most straightforward mansion levels. The basement, main floor, and upper level are all meant to be seen as individual components. Understanding which different routes lead to where is key to smoothly exploring a level. What Thief does is provide musical and often visual cues so you can identify the transition to a new area. Visually, this is communicated with a change in color scheme, architecture, or lighting. Musically, transitions will either be abruptly triggered by the player, like when I walk downstairs and Korn starts playing, or subtly altered as the player moves about the level. The Horn of Quintus is a great example of this. In this mission, the player is tasked with finding a magical horn. The level is really expansive and intimidating on your first playthrough. As you get closer and closer to the horn, the melody becomes more audible, like the world's creepiest game of Marco Polo. The sound of the horn blends so seamlessly with the music, you may not even notice the volume fluctuating as you play. It's a good thing I wasn't in charge of sound design, because man, my take on horn sounds is very different. In general, Thief brilliantly uses presentation to serve a purpose in gameplay. They are totally inseparable from each other. Speaking of gameplay, let's talk about gameplay. Thief is a first-person stealth game. If you're familiar with the subgenre immersive sim, Thief was one of the first of those. You're dropped into relatively open-ended maps and given vague objectives to complete how you see fit. You can pull out a sword and kill some guards, but there's a heavy emphasis on sneaking around and avoiding conflict here. If you pick a fight or set off an alarm, you won't last very long. So just like real life, you should try to dispatch an angry mob with flashbangs and sleeping gas before killing them. If you're playing on expert, you're not allowed to kill anyone at all. That's right, this isn't Grove Street. A good thief here doesn't dirty his hands. Objectives in Thief usually involve thieving things. Mission objectives can range from deceptively simple to overwhelmingly complex, but usually involve you making off with one or more treasures and looting a minimum threshold of value before making your escape. The loot requirements are a good way to encourage exploration, since many of Thief's levels are way more complex than you'd give them credit for on one single playthrough. I played through the game more times than I can count, and I'm still finding new stuff every time. I find it really interesting that with all the advancements in AI and hardware, Thief's stealth system remains one of the most deep, complex, and mechanically sound in video game history. A lot of stealth games will measure the player's visibility depending on whether they're crouching, if they're behind objects, and by how much noise they're making. Thief's stealth system does this as well, but way more extensively. Line of sight does play a significant role in Thief's stealth, but the simulation runs deeper than that. How well lit Garrett is, how much sound he's producing while walking, and mainly how alert a guard is are all all the main determining factors in whether or not you'll be spotted. But unlike some games where there's only a marginal difference in your sneaking ability, in Thieve it's all make or break. If a guard stumbles across a body, his senses will become heightened. If Garrett makes a noise and the guard hears it in this state, he'll now pursue the source of the noise, where otherwise he'd make a comment about it being a rat or something. There's many layers of sensory information that enemies use to make decisions. What fascinates me about this system is that despite its complexity, it's actually very intuitive while playing. You gain an understanding of what you can get away with just based on how guards are acting. Far from just avoiding vision cones on radar, you sneak. You sneak like you would sneak in the situation. I mean, think about it this way. What if I told you there was some guy in your house right now? Next time you went to the kitchen to make a mayonnaise sandwich, yeah, you've got very low standards. Your eyes would be darting back and forth constantly. You'd jump at the sound of the furnace kicking on. That's what I mean though. Thieve takes that into account. A guard's awareness really changes your likelihood of detection. Another major part of your success in sneaking is how well lit everything is, represented by this gem at the bottom of the screen. If you're fully lit, a guard can see you from a mile away. In total darkness, enemies can walk right by you without ever having known you're there. Naturally, moving around will increase your visibility. How visible you are comes down to how quickly you're moving, so you'll usually want to slow it right down and creep by enemies unseen. I'd say if there's one thing it would be cool to see some innovation on, it would be finding a way around this light gem. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a problem in the least, but it's clearly there for a lack of a more immersive way of communicating lighting to the player. If there was some way to understand how well lit you were without having to look at a piece of UI, that would be awesome. Maybe someday. Now the most intimidating enemy in Thieve isn't the guards. It's not these little dinosaur guys, or Joan of Arc. It's not even this guy. Although he's probably a close second. No, the most intimidating enemy in Thieve is this black and white tiled flooring. Set one foot on this and scream in terror as every single guard in the Tri-County area gains Terminator vision and starts punching down walls to come find you.
What's going on? Hey.
You always have to be aware of what you're walking on. It's a strangely overlooked component of modern stealth, but it makes perfect sense. Try walking down some creaky wooden stairs while your parents are having guests over. You'd give anything for some carpeting. Look who came out of his dungeon! There are times where you'd have a perfect play if not for that damn tile flooring, which is actually what makes Thieve so great. Things rarely go according to plan, but there's always room for improvisation. You know, in cartoons when people freeze and pretend to be mannequins so they don't get spotted? It do be like that sometimes. Unlike a lot of modern stealth games, Garrett doesn't have any special powers or unique abilities. There are no skill points or attributes here, just what Garrett can carry on his person. Thankfully, there are a lot of really cool gadgets and tools that can make things easier. You've got stuff like flash bombs and mines, but most of your arsenal comes in the form of different arrows that can be used situationally. That's why I'd like to formally introduce the official arrow power rankings as sponsored by Monster Energy. So I'm actually not allowed to use my own words for this introduction. A spokesperson for Monster gave me a pre-written piece to read out, so sorry for the disconnect here. Arrows are a big part of our lives. Since we were kids, we've loved to shoot arrows. But in Thieve, arrows aren't just arrows. Much like how Monster Energy isn't just another energy drink. At Monster Energy, we know athletes, gamers, and yes, archers don't just care about getting the job done. They care about dreaming big, working hard, and playing harder. But when you want to play your hardest, you need to hit the ground running. So tear into a can of Monster Energy and enjoy that smooth drinking flavor that you can feel good about. While you hit that caffeine buzz, Monster Energy will be kicking it old school by partnering with Magular Entertainment to bring you the official Thief the Dark Project Arrow ranking. Unleash the beast today. Okay, that's it, I think. So standard broadhead arrows can be used to dispatch enemies, mostly useful if Garrett still hasn't been detected. If the enemy is alert, these arrows become Nerf darts.
Power is pumping and arrows in your hand. Now your heart is thumping, fire as quick as you can. Nerf, bow and arrow. The enemy's coming, now they're in your sights. Nerf, bow and arrow.
It's Nerf or nothing.
So due to their spottiness, I put them 7th in the official arrow power ranking. The Noisemaker arrow is a highly situational tool. Functionally, it serves the same purpose as throwing a bottle does in most stealth games, but here it doesn't always work so well. In most games, the keen minds in charge of patrolling the area will go stare at the source of the sound. But when enemies in Thieve hear a Noisemaker arrow, it's like a Lovecraft story where they just became privy to some inhuman knowledge. They and everyone else nearby become extremely violent and paranoid. They turn around so quickly you can't even reliably successfully sneak past them, so I never found too much of a use for these arrows. That's why I placed them 6th in the official arrow power rankings. Fire arrows are also highly situational. They do a lot of damage to enemies, and you can use them to blow up explosive barrels. If that sounds appealing to you, you probably shouldn't be playing a stealth game. They can also be used to relight torches, which is occasionally required to solve the odd puzzle. I put them 5th in the official arrow power ranking. Moss arrows are fired on the ground and create a soft surface where Garrett can step or jump without producing any sound. They're definitely helpful at times and can certainly get you out of some tight spots, but the range on them is really short. They just kind of fart out some gunk in a 3-foot perimeter. Still helpful though, that's why they take the 4th place on the official Monster Energy arrow power rankings. Gas arrows are very rare and very useful. They instantly knock out most enemies. It's funny that a game like Metal Gear Solid gives you 1,000,000 tranquilizer rounds, while in Thief you savor every precious gas arrow you can get your hands on. It just goes to show how different the philosophy of stealth is between these two games. They're 3rd in the official arrow power ranking. Water arrows might be the most consistently useful of all. They can douse torches and make an area suitable for sneaking. I can't get enough of these things. I'm using them all the time to clear a path. Of course, some lighting in Thief is magical or electric, in which case they won't help much, but pack a lot of them because they'll save your ass multiple times per level. They're 2nd in the official arrow power ranking. Finally, there's the rope arrow. I love the rope arrow, not just for what it does, but for what it represents. When you first get your hands on these things, the realization that you can fire an arrow into a surface to produce a climbable rope fundamentally changes the game. All of a sudden, you become more aware of your surroundings, especially in levels with a lot of verticality. It's true you can only stick them to wooden surfaces, so you're effectively stopped from sequence breaking, but the rope arrow embodies the ethos of immersive sims for me. It's a simple tool that broadens your perception of the game world. Using it makes you feel smart and cool, even though you're not. I mean, me, by the way. You might be smart and cool. If you haven't subscribed to me, you're definitely not smart and cool, though. Rope arrows are 1st place in the official arrow power ranking. On top of the bow, your most used tool is probably going to be the blackjack. If you catch an enemy unaware, bopping them with this thing is an instant knockout. Same with these little dinosaurs. I love how preparing a blackjack swing looks. Like, Garrett is clearly holding this thing in the most cartoonishly exaggerated bonk position. The blackjack is really satisfying to use because it's reliable. It's the only objective advantage you have over the game world. If you're smart and patient, you can clear out large sections of a level, but that's not always the case. Since the nature of a first-person stealth game is way different than a third-person or top-down view, you're really limited in what you can perceive at a given time. That's why it's so important to keep your eyes and ears peeled. You can never really relax because if you can see an enemy, they can probably see you too. It adds a layer of tension to the game and encourages you to play passively. There's often no real point in putting yourself in harm's way. Walking into a well-lit room just to blackjack an enemy presents some unnecessary danger. Enemies don't just crumple to the floor, they kind of sway a bit before hitting the ground, and then you've got to move their unconscious body before it's discovered, which limits your mobility a lot. By the time all is said and done, another patrol could walk in and see you with their friend on your shoulder.
I think a baby bird pecked me.
You can get a lot out of the blackjack, but in some cases you're probably better off just sneaking by undetected rather than engaging. As mentioned, you also have a variety of mines and flash bombs. With the right conditions, they can be extremely useful, but sometimes they just don't work. I don't really know why this is. I'm assuming it has something to do with the enemy's alertness or something, but make sure you quick save before you throw one of these because there's a 50% chance it won't do shit. The last tools worth mentioning are your lockpicks. You've got 2 of them with square and triangle teeth respectively. The shape doesn't actually mean much. What matters here is that unlocking a chest or door requires you to alternate back and forth between the appropriate one. When you're desperately trying to get out of dodge and you hear footsteps around the corner, having to fumble between the picks to get the door open is a really tense experience. You never know what order to pick a given lock, and different doors have various levels of difficulty to open. It's a pretty clever way of adding an additional layer of thievery to the experience while maintaining balance. I also appreciate that there's no minigame to speed bump your fun. Thief and Morrowind are the only games where I can tolerate lockpicking. Either just do it automatically or have me fail a dice roll. Don't patronize me with this. I mentioned earlier I talk a bit more about enemy animations. The reason it's pertinent here is because animation, especially on enemies, is a surprisingly major part of the stealth experience. There are 2 enemy types here, patrols and stationary enemies. Patrols move in predetermined routes, usually connecting in some kind of loop or walking back and forth between points. Stationary enemies, unsurprisingly, stand in one place, usually changing the direction they're looking in, but occasionally not even doing that. If I was a guard, this would be my gig. Spring a Game Boy or a Jughead Double Digest, and relax before you're clubbed to unconsciousness. In order to successfully sneak past enemies, it's critical to know what the next few seconds of gameplay will look like. If a patrolling enemy suddenly turns around and sees the player with no warning, not only is it unrealistic, but it's unfair for the player. There needs to be some indication communication of an enemy's next move, especially in a first-person game where the enemy needs to be in the player's line of sight to be spotted. In Thief, you'll become aware of an unseen enemy's presence with increasingly loud sound of footsteps. They'll usually warn you of their presence by whistling or mumbling too. Once they're in your sightline, they visually communicate their next move with some really expressive animation work. The animations are all mo-capped, and even though it looks kind of funny applied to these blocky character models, there was an obvious intention here in exaggerating movements for the sake of the player's understanding. Enemies don't just heel turn around, they pause and take a look at their surroundings. If they're in an alert state, they don't just walk around with heightened senses. They grasp their sword and squint while hunting for you. They become paranoid and suddenly turn to the slightest provocation. If they give up, their posture relaxes and they return to their previous activity. You always have an idea of what'll happen next. Despite this, it's a good idea to use a lot of quick saves so you can experiment with different tactics and see what works. There's no one-size-fits-all solution in Thief. Each mission requires you to modify your strategy. As for the actual thieving in Thief, it's pretty straightforward. Each level is packed full of valuables that all have a dollar value. On top of your primary objectives, you also have to pilfer a minimum dollar value before you're allowed to complete a mission. That amount changes depending on the difficulty you're playing on. Some goods are in a predictable spot. Golden candlesticks on a dining table, goblets being washed in a basin, jewelry on the bedside table, all very relatable in my household. However, if you're playing on hard or expert, you'll have to get a bit more creative with your treasure hunting. Mansions are chock full of locked doors, secret passageways, safes, and hatches, which hide the most valuable items. The challenge of Thief is being as thorough as possible while contending with enemies. Looking underneath objects, pickpocketing keys from guards, and finding vantage points are all necessary keys to success. Some people don't like the loot requirements, which I can understand. On one hand, it's nice to have the incentive to explore. On the other, sometimes you'll be just a little bit short and have to go through the entire level to find one gem you missed before you can exit. Whatever loot was earned in the previous level can be used before the next one to purchase tools for the mission. You can't hoard loot between levels, so like your wiener, use it or lose it, brother. Sorry for that targeted joke for the 2% of my audience analytics has marked as women, but to be fair, I don't understand female humor because every time I open my mouth to talk to one, they all run for the nearest Bobby.
Help! Help!
You stop right there, night creeper.
As a compulsive video game hoarder, I appreciate being urged to spend my money. On top of ticking off an arbitrary objective, it gives you some additional motivation to steal as much as possible, like a good thief does. Outside of increased loot thresholds, increasing difficulty also expands your objectives like GoldenEye or Time Splitters, with more specific items to collect or tasks to perform. If you ask me, this is the best way to do difficulty options. It adds replayability to an already replayable game and forces you to be more conscientious while playing. I recommend playing on at least hard. Might seem a bit intimidating, but you'll be missing out on a lot of content otherwise. So after being introduced to Garrett, the game begins proper. The introductory level is the Manor of Lord Bafford, a nobleman out on business. We're supposed to sneak in and steal his scepter, then find a way out. You know, that's the kind of rich guy I'd be. Somebody with a scepter. If you flaunt your wealth in the wrong place, you might get robbed, but nobody fucks with the scepter guy. It all starts back on the city streets, which is the only place where guards are non-hostile towards Garrett. You can try just walking into the manor, but it won't go well. Rather, we're supposed to find a secret back entrance that leads through some sewer tunnels. It's a really solid introduction to the things you'll be doing throughout the game. Looking for alternate routes, knocking guards out, stealing their keys, listening to alcoholics tell stories that you're too nice to walk away from.
Hey there, friend. What's with the crazy getup?
That kind of thing. Bafford's Manor is such a great introductory level, I have to wonder if Looking Glass Studios took John Romero's advice and built this level last, after they knew what they were doing. It's large but not intimidating. It's densely layered, packed with loot and secrets, and lots of visually distinctive areas. It's also really fair with the lighting and floor surfaces. You're given a fair amount of leeway. At this point, you might notice the map. What the hell is this? This looks like something I'd scribble on a piece of toilet paper to show someone where the nearest Denny's is. This is actually a great example of the graphics and user interface influencing gameplay. It makes sense. Why would Garrett have a perfect map of a place he's never been? Prior to missions, Garrett acquiring a map is usually explained. He bribes the waitstaff of a mansion to make him one, another thief gives him a makeshift map. Hell, some of the maps have question marks, like even he's not sure if this is accurate information. If I opened Google Earth and saw this, I'd probably pull a U-turn back to Winnipeg, and I don't make that threat lightly. The usefulness of maps is severely limited because of this. You really need to pay attention to your surroundings and develop a sense of direction, or else you'll be hopelessly lost more often than not. The map gives you a general idea of where to go, as long as you have your compass out, but it never tells you exactly what to expect. So anyway, we nab the scepter and make our way out. Turns out that Garrett's usual fence, Cuddy, has been arrested by the Hammerites and sent to Cragscleft prison, so we've got to go break him out. There's an entrance from some abandoned mines that the prison guards don't mess with because they're haunted, which is kind of cowardly for a group of stalwart manly men like the Hammerites. It's also a pretty juicy setup for a second mission. We've gone from robbing some noblemen to pulling off a prison break in a haunted mountain cave. Talk about upping the ante. Cragscleft represents a pretty huge departure from the Manor, but in some ways it's most emblematic of the Dark Project as a level. I stress the first Thief game here because the second is definitely more mansion heavy, which seems to be the style of play most people prefer. Note that when I use the term mansion, I'm not always necessarily referring to an actual mansion. It's just a term I use to describe non-linear levels that take place in large, conventionally laid out interiors with multiple floors. Thief 1 has got multiple levels with these kinds of supernatural dungeon crawls, where the objective isn't always to steal something, but to reach an end goal of sorts while dealing with zombies and skeletons.
Curse you all!
Because the undead can't communicate with each other, being detected by them isn't as punishing as some other enemies, but it's probably still a good idea to avoid conflict. It's pretty easy to get turned around in some of these areas. There are signs to help you out, but a lot of this level looks the same. The spooky atmosphere is heightened compared to Bafford's Manor, and it's never clear where the in-game sounds and music are separated. There's periodic shrieking, which is just unnerving. And the beating of this drum is hypnotic. At a certain point, the mines transition to the prison area, which is where the gameplay becomes a bit more traditionally thiefy. You're given multiple routes to take into the prison proper, and once inside there are 4 cell blocks where Cuddy could potentially be. So you've got to sneak through each one, reading the prisoner manifest and moving on until you find him.
Let's get you out of here and me my money.
Afraid you're gonna be disappointed?
Good thing you're dying, Cuddy. Or I'd have to kill you for stiffing me.
He dies in front of us, but not before telling us where to find some information on a very pricey treasure. What a nice guy. If I was literally dying of pneumonia, I feel like I wouldn't be lucid or caring enough to recall that info. Our objectives change, and now we have to go crack into the prison evidence locker. Playing on Expert, I also have to haul this unconscious guy Basso out of the prison with me, which certainly adds a layer of tension and minor annoyance to the second half of the mission. Poor Garrett's getting more than he bargained for. We arrive at the evidence locker only to find that the information has been stolen, so you have to find a crawl space which leads to the body of the thief. It's a long journey back to the entrance, and Basso is so dummy thick that the clapping of his ass cheeks keeps alerting guards to my presence.
Halt! Show thyself at once!
The dialogue from Hammerites is pretty great. People in this game speak normally, so I find it funny how the Hammers talk in this needlessly verbose Old English style.
Cease thy hiding, craven. Thou canst not stay in shadows forever.
They also recite the tenets of the builder as they wander around the mine, like they're nervously trying to ward off evil spirits. It's these little touches that give even basic enemies a lot of character. Their lines change depending on the level you're on. And the voice acting of the game isn't always great, but they're always giving it their all. On top of introducing us to this dungeon crawl type mission, Cragscleft Prison also demonstrates how objectives can change in Thief. Nothing is ever so simple as it seems. You're often deliberately misguided and forced to reassess the situation. Garrett's handling of the situation is a reminder of his keeper training. This guy doesn't stress about anything. If you're not a fan of the supernatural or dungeon crawling stuff, the next level exists solely to filter you. Down in the Bonehoard has us finding our way to the city catacombs. Here we'll be looking for the aforementioned treasure, which is called the Horn of Quintus. It's a massive underground tomb full of zombies and this guy. The previous mission had spooky elements, but the atmosphere here heavily leans into horror. Zombies don't stay down once killed. You need to use holy water to power up your water arrows. To this day, it's absolutely satisfying to see zombie gibs go everywhere. This level is huge. I feel like I get lost every time I play it. The first section consists of vaults connected with large hallways, staircases, and even flooded tunnels. Imagine reading this guy's will. Listen, fuckers, I want a sarcophagus. Move through an underwater tunnel into an unreachable area. Put a torch above my body and make sure somebody is there to keep it lit permanently. If you don't do this, I will be drafted into the skeleton army, at which point I will come find you. I know you're all wondering who gets my golden cup. The answer is none of you. Place it next to me so that I might admire it for eternity. Also, kill Jerry Seinfeld and bury him with me. I need some entertainment for the afterlife. What am I gonna do? Kramer, up down to the Bonehoard! Get me out of here, Kramer! The vaults are okay to deal with, but the caverns underneath them present a bit of a problem. Like the mines of Cragscleft, they all look identical. Unless you've played this level multiple times, it's almost impossible to keep track of where you've already been. The music track for this area is suitably dark and creepy. The reverb gives the player an impression of size and distance, which is appropriate when you consider how tall the ceilings in this place are. There's a beautiful melody coming from the horn of Quintus. The closer you are, the louder it gets. Yet because of the nature of the situation, there's nothing pleasant or reassuring about it. That happy melody just makes everything even creepier and adds a nice layer of atmosphere to an already very moody track. Sometimes in these old games, people hit an early roadblock and give up. I wouldn't be surprised if Bonehoard was that roadblock for many people. It's a level that seriously shatters your expectations, not necessarily in a good way. It's all about exploration, trap evasion, and treasure hunting. Being a thief doesn't really play into it that much. You feel more like a Tomb Raider. Literally. I wasn't very keen on Bonehoard when I first played Thief years ago, but since then I've come to really appreciate what a unique and atmospheric level it is. Looking Glass was doing something totally new and unheard of. It makes sense that things would be a little bit all over the place, but I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a lot of variety in these first 3 levels that I'm grateful for, given that I've played them more than anything else in this game. So we make our way out. Upon returning to the surface, Garrett sells the horn of Quintus to a new fence, who's promptly shot and killed with an arrow. Eavesdropping on the assassins, it looks like the arrow is meant for Garrett. I love how totally remorseless Garrett is. Like, this is 100% his fault. The guy probably had kids, but the first thing he does is go, "Oh no," and start stealing shit from behind his counter. This level is called Assassins, and it starts with a tailing mission. Now, I know tailing missions don't have the best reputation, and for very good reason, but this one isn't so bad. The meat and potatoes and nuts of this mission really kicks off when you reach your destination. The assassins were sent by a city warden named Ramirez, who's not happy that Garrett works independently. See, the wardens allow thievery to take place in the city as long as they get a sizable cut of the profits. Garrett ain't having that. He's an independent man who don't need no warden. So we reach the Ramirez mansion, and this whole level plays out like an extended version of Bafford's Manor. An extremely well-designed interior level with lots of fun side rooms to explore. This is the quintessential thief mission, just rock-solid exploration and room-based challenges to deal with. There's also a lot that happens narratively in this level while Geralt's Garrett. While Garrett's under your control. There's confusion in the beginning as you watch your new fence die, overhear the conversation, and watch as, once again, your objectives change. The tailing section lasts a perfect amount of time to set up this heist. It builds it up in a way that makes the mansion robbing feel like a reward rather than just another level. What's interesting is that the increased difficulty changes not only your objective, but the route that the assassins take through the city. It becomes more challenging and lengthier on expert compared to hard or normal, which is an awesome addition.
I feel the compulsive urge to take the scenic route today. Most good, Johnson. Most good.
On top of the standard looting, you have to steal the coin purse right from Ramirez's belt. I beat him unconscious for the hell of it, but that's not necessary. I like that you can ring Ramirez's bell and his servant will come down with food. Pick the wrong day to do your job, you son of a bitch.
Help! Help! Ah!
Something worth mentioning is that I'm playing the gold version of Thief,
Yippee!
which makes some minor changes as well as adding 3 entirely new levels. The mission after Assassins, titled Thieves Guild, is the first of those 3 levels. Thieves Guild is another level with multiple phases. Each section of the level flows into a new and larger section. The level starts with a lot of promise. Garrett breaks into the Downwind Thieves Guild after they beat him to a big score with the goal of pilfering a sapphire vase that Garrett believes should be rightly his. It's evident that this mission was added after the fact. It doesn't move the story in any particular direction, but just kind of shoehorns another heist in here, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I like the idea of the thief breaking into a den of thieves and stealing something from right under their noses. If you get caught, the other thieves instantly recognize Garrett and freak out.
Hold it right there, Garrett! Move and you're dead!
The guild uses a restaurant as a front, but moving into the basement reveals the Overlord's Fancy, a gambling den hidden underneath the city. The instrumental hip-hop track that plays here is a really confusing choice for this area, and very unfitting. The Overlord's Fancy seems underdeveloped, which is too bad because a fully fleshed out casino area would be such an awesome fit for this game. Instead of that, we sadly get a sewer section, and it's not really a good one, which seems kind of redundant to say. These tunnels connect high-ranking Thieves Guild members to one another. They're winding, confusing, and just go on and on. This whole area is proof that a level being large isn't an inherently good thing. It's actually a detriment to this area. It's incredibly easy to miss objectives, and good luck finding your way back if you do. You need hidden keys to open hidden doors. Each entryway looks just like the last one. The guild members' houses are actually pretty decent. If the whole level was this alone, I think it would work strongly in this mission's favor. But there's nothing fun or engaging about getting lost in ugly, narrow tunnels, and the restaurant section, though it too had potential, adds nothing to the experience. It's in the running for worst level, but it's not irredeemable. There are things to like about it. The music track that plays in the second half of the level is great. It might be my favorite of the dark ambient style tracks. It's just two simple notes set to the dripping of pipes, but it's so damn effective at creating atmosphere. I also like the guild leaders' houses. They're like multiple little condensed mansion levels. Following the Thieves Guild is The Sword. Garrett is contracted by a woman named Victoria. Her theme song is twisted. This melody sounds like it should be cheerful, but its playback on a tape that keeps speeding and slowing makes it sound demented. There's also something that sounds like an air raid siren pulsating in the background, which heightens the sense of unease to an unbearable level. At this point, the perceptive mind might feel a bit suspicious of Victoria. She represents a mysterious client who wants Garrett to steal a magical sword. The sword is owned by a man named Constantine, and his mansion sets the stage for our next mission. The sword is, without a shadow of a doubt, my favorite mission in the entire game. Maybe the entire Thief series, certainly top 3. It appears as yet another mansion break-in, but things change very quickly. Recall when I talked about Thief's visual design. Oversaturated, gaudy photo textures create this fever dream atmosphere. That is amplified heavily in the sword. The architecture here is bizarre, an amalgamation of funhouse distortions and nature reclaiming ownership of the mansion. As you move from one room to the next, your eyes play tricks on you. Who owns this place? What manner of magical treachery is this? You navigate physically impossible spaces, but the house stays one step ahead of you, always catching you off guard. The house itself begins laughing at your expense as you climb higher and higher to the top, never sure what you should expect next. The beauty of the standard mansion level is order. Entryway leads to dining room, leads to kitchen, leads to hallway, leads to staircase, each transition comfortable and predictable, perfect for a master thief. But Constantine's mansion is chaos. A thief owns the shadows and feels comfort only when watching others from an unseen point, but it's clear Garrett's eyes aren't doing the watching here. He's being mocked, tested, but a job is a job, so we've got to find the sword. Where the level succeeds isn't just in its bizarre, perfectly executed concept, but in the fact that underneath it all is actually just a fun, imaginative level. It's been 20 years and it's still the platonic ideal of thief levels. It's not gimmicky or a one and done, it's a great level full of unique challenges and branching paths. I already knew the game was awesome, but the sword was the, oh, this is probably a masterpiece moment. So sure enough, Constantine is the mysterious contractor. This was his mansion. I feel if it were me, I'd probably have a lot of questions like, did you bolt the chairs to the wall yourself? Or do you have a permit to build in non-Euclidean space? But I digress. Garrett's got a job to do. Constantine wants us to go find a treasure known as the Eye, locked up in the old Hammerite Cathedral. He's offering a ludicrous sum of money for it. The only problem is that the cathedral is located in the city's old quarter. Some kind of disaster occurred here, so the city was walled off decades ago and now zombies walk the streets. This level, called the Haunted Cathedral, allows you to explore the old city. Ironically, the Haunted Cathedral itself plays a really small part, but I guess the Haunted City sounds like a Vincent Price movie. There are several blocks of the city, each with houses, outposts, and businesses that have long since been abandoned. The creepy vibe is in full effect here, with lots of zombies and these ghost mages that have the scariest sound design in the game. You can see the DNA Looking Glass used to create horror in System Shock 2 here. Personally, I'd consider this to be one of my least favorite levels in the game. Once again, it's easy to get lost and the map doesn't help much. I don't mind the exploration and there are some great moments in this level, but playing on hard or expert puts a really stringent loot requirement on that always forces me to backtrack about a dozen times. I think die-hard Thief fans are unlikely to have this problem, which is fair, but for me, I guess I'm only a die-soft Thief fan. I always find it easy to miss these little open windows or rooftops with treasure on them. In most levels, loot is kind of centralized to certain locations, so where you find one treasure, you find others. Here, it's spread out very thinly across a large and confusing map. Some standout moments are this not-so-abandoned house, which produces one of the scariest moments in the game for me. You also find the old stronghold of the Keepers, which is the organization that Garrett used to be a part of. I like how they've hidden it away with traps to keep unwanted guests out. It makes me curious about the Keepers as an organization. What were they doing? What kind of enemies did they have? Were they the ones who turned the frogs gay?
Destroy the child. Corrupt them all.
Finally, there's the cathedral itself. Finding it produces a really striking image that always sticks in my head. Going around back, you can see a lot of creepy activity occurring inside the building, and a spirit whispers to Garrett.
Comes a man to rescue me. Poor man. The keepers have sealed the door.
I gotta wonder, do you just start sounding scary when you're a ghost? Or do ghosts go out of their way to sound scary because they think it's endearing or something? It turns out that the cathedral is locked. Not just locked, but very locked, so not even the master thief can get in. In order to unlock the door, we've gotta find 4 talismans, which the keepers have graciously mapped out for us, so this sets the stage for our next few missions. Some people might consider this a series of fetch quests, and they are, but that's okay. I believe that fetch quests are tools that can be used well or poorly, and they're being used here to give us more sneaky goodness, so what's the complaint about? The next mission is the Mage Towers, at least if you're playing Thief Gold. The Talisman of Earth is being kept in this complex where the reclusive mages practice their magery. A lot of people consider the Mage Towers to be one of the weaker levels in the game, and I get why. The biggest problem is that the level just feels unfinished. Everything is very geometrically basic. A lot of rooms are completely empty, not even a couch or a shelf. There's also platforming in this level. I'm convinced that platforming in the Thief engine is a Guantanamo Bay torture tactic. There's also a hedge maze which connects all the different towers. Like the gambling den, it's a great idea that falls totally flat. I feel like stealth in a hedge maze would automatically be awesome, but you could just walk around the perimeter of the maze. So what's the point of this at all? They could have just made it a garden area. In spite of its problems, I actually really like the Mage Towers. First of all, the concept is ambitious. There are 4 towers, each representing a different element. They're connected to a multi-floor central keep in the middle of the grounds. The central keep is a pretty good sneaking area. There are a lot of stairwells, a basement, and side paths that double back to one another. The level is full of loot, so unlike the Haunted Cathedral, you don't have to worry about meeting the requirements so much. Outside of the keep, there's the elemental towers. The problem with these is mainly that they don't feel like real environments. Rather, they come across as video game levels, which they are, but it shouldn't feel like it. The mansions, the prison, even the Thieves Guild all feel like areas that serve a purpose regardless of whether or not Garrett is there to steal stuff. But the Mage Towers are just linear areas. They usually offer a platforming or stealth related challenge. What do the guys in the Earth Tower do? Play hacky sack? At least the air mages are doing something, looking at space and shit. But a lot of these areas just have mages doing short, predictable patrol routes. I do like the lines they mutter about wizardry and whatnot.
Feel the countless waters, see the vast earth, and burn in eternal fires.
It's some of my favorite voice acting. I'd also consider the multiple music tracks playing here to be my favorite in the entire game. In particular, the air tower sounds so ethereal and weirdly nostalgic. It sounds glassy, crystalline, like experiments being performed in alembics and beakers, which is just as well because there's a meth lab in the basement of the keep, and also a dungeon. Some torture device, what are they gonna do with that? Oh no, square it, run! The fire tower is just a pain in the ass. All the floors are made of metal and these wizards have magically enhanced hearing. How do you even discern an enemy footstep? There's like 38 wizards walking in here. I take one step and everybody loses their minds. Also, it's a little corny that because they're fire wizards, they live in a tower filled with lava. It seems uncomfortable and unnecessary, and don't tell me they need fire to do fire magic, or else they're the most useless wizards to ever exist. I don't need fire magic if I already have access to fire. It's the scarcity and inconvenience of having fire on me at all times that gives fire magic its value in the first place. So in spite of the shortcomings, I enjoy the Mage Towers. There's a lot of variety in the layouts and visual design, even if it doesn't live up to the standards set by some of Thief's better levels. The music tracks are great, and there's a lot of unique textures used in the towers themselves. themselves. So we pilfer the Talisman of Earth, and next up is the Talisman of Fire. It's located in the lost city of Carith Din, the entrance to which was sealed by the Keepers long ago. Garrett manages to break the seal, and we find ourselves at the entrance to this ancient city. Such a cool setup for a level, and once again proof that Thieve has some of the strongest mission variety in the business. I already made a Tomb Raider comparison, so I'll spare you that reference. How about Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine? Remember that classic? The game your mom got you for Christmas because she saw Harrison Ford on the cover? This level will bring to mind the many childhood memories you have of playing Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. The Lost City was a level I specifically remember hating on a previous playthrough, so I took some deep breaths and went in with an open mind, and I do have a lot of positive things to say about it now. As I said, it's an interesting setup, and there are a lot of old papyruses you can read for some background information. Knowing that this place is directly underneath the city piques my curiosity. Who came before? What wiped them out? Why was the entrance sealed? Though it's a little close to the city. I mean, they literally just covered it with a stone plate and called it a day. I feel like it's statistically likely that someone would accidentally discover this place eventually. The enemies in this level are mainly fire elementals and these little Flintstones buggers. The fire elementals can be a pain simply because you can't tell which way they're facing. A single water arrow takes care of them, but more keep spawning throughout the level. They start to feel like pests more than anything. These dino guys called Burricks are in a few missions. They spit poison, but if you damage them enough, they'll start whining like dogs and running away. Aw, come on, man, just let it go. If you really need to dispatch them, just one bonk does the trick. Occasionally, they'll let out a cry that sounds like a loon call, too. They seem to have some rudimentary intelligence. They'll cry out sadly when they find the body of a friend. And they've burrowed out some complicated tunnels. I don't know, I feel like if the Keepers were smart, they'd work on a Burrick alliance. We're not giving these fellas enough credit. I still don't love the Lost City, it's just not my type of level. It's almost impossible to know the lay of the land, and once again, loot is just decentralized enough to be a pain to hunt down. I can understand why some people do like it. There's something exciting and intrepid about battling dinosaurs in the lost ruins of an ancient civilization. Also, there's no killing restrictions in this level, so I can release a Mage Tower's worth of pent-up aggression here. The next level is called Song of the Caverns. It's the third and final level added with the Gold expansion, and it single-handedly justifies a playthrough of that version. When I first played this level, I was disappointed to see how it starts. More caverns, spooky crab enemies, only 200 gold, that means there's barely any loot. But this mission is a bait and switch, a really good one in fact. You reach the area where you should be grabbing the Talisman of Water, only to find that it's been taken. Further into the caverns, you find this guy.
The handsome, young opera house owner sings to the Lady Valerius, "I, Raoul, do accuse you of using treachery to obtain your wealth." Then Lady Valerius sings, "I, Lady Valerius, have obtained the opera house, yes. Right from under your nose, you must kiss the ground underneath my..."
So he gives you a key and a map, and you break into the city opera house. Your objectives totally change, and the opera house is a fantastic level. In principle, it's similar to a mansion level, but with some twists. First of all, most of the building is really well lit. There are tile floors everywhere, and guards are constantly patrolling every which way. This makes it a pretty significant challenge, with lots of patient waiting for patrols to pass and moss arrows being used. The first floor of the building is the most visually striking, with lots of vibrant carpeting and wallpaper, gold adornments, and crystal chandeliers. This place is clearly an escape for the city's aristocracy. There's also some backstage areas with performance practicing for what appears to be the most exciting show of the century. The second floor is where things get really fun though. Many of the performers' dressing rooms line the hallways here, all chock full of goods, and the opera booths are connected via a central passage. I love sneaking into the booths, living out my twisted fantasies of punishing theater critics.
By that horrendous music Cribbs has written.
You're just miffed because Cribbs is fond of tragic endings.
That's not it at all. Since Valerius took over, we've had to endure this Mr. Cribbs and his twist.
I say, in with
God!
Damn theater critics. Anyway, back to critiquing this theater level. The third floor has some offices and a library. It's here that we find the next talisman. I think it'd be fair to assume that Song of the Caverns was a direct response to people asking for more mansion levels. It may not be a mansion, but it's that type of level, and it's about as good as they get, almost. The whole place is so colorful, chock full of wealthy patrons and valuable items. I never get tired of going room to room, finding every piece of jewelry I can get my hands on. It's one of those levels that's just a joy to experience for the first time, and it's certainly among my favorites in Thief Gold. Following Song of the Caverns is our final talisman getting mission, and this one is called Undercover. The air talisman is locked up securely in a Hammerite temple, so securely in fact that it would be impossible for even Garrett to get in and out undetected. So as the name would suggest, Garrett puts his altar boy costume on and heads into the temple undercover as a Hammerite novice. Gameplay wise, this mission marks a significant departure from anything we've played so far. The layout of the Hammer Temple isn't markedly different than any other indoor location, but having to maintain your cover really changes the way you explore. It feels right to crouch and find the nearest dark corner, but you'll actually be punished for playing that way. Here you have to act natural.
Surely not for many years.
Art thou blind?
Don't do anything suspicious like accidentally bump into the basement wizard. God help you if you bump into the basement wizard. You're only allowed to move about certain areas, restricted ones being marked with this upside down hammer. I find that kind of odd. The hammer is their holy symbol. Imagine you were in a Christian church and the restricted areas were marked with an upside down cross. Wouldn't you just assume something sinister was going on in there? I love party missions in games like Hitman or Dishonored, so this premise appeals to me. There's something kind of comfy and relaxing about having to fit in and pulling off the dirty work when nobody's looking. The main issue I have with Undercover is that it's never clear what's considered suspicious or acceptable behavior. Because of how the AI's sensory information is done behind the scenes, the Hammer guards always seem to react differently to the same crime. Sometimes just having been in an off-limits room minutes ago is enough to set them off. Other times I'll just walk out of a restricted area eating a banana and nobody gives a shit. This unpredictability led me to quick save more in this level than any other in Thief. It feels like the only way to get anything done is to push the boundaries and reload if it doesn't work, which feels a bit unfair. The main challenge of this level is unlocking the area with a talisman. You have to find 5 different levers scattered throughout the level and flip them all within a couple of minutes. Some are hidden in the garden, others are in the catacombs beneath the temple. A bit frustrating, but it's an interesting challenge, some real Spencer Mansion type shenanigans. I think Undercover is a decent level overall because it forces you to improvise in a way you might not be comfortable with. It's all the more impressive when you consider that this was the first level in a stealth game to do such a thing, at least to my knowledge. It's mind-blowing to consider how many precedents Looking Glass set on their first try. After stealing the talisman and making our way out, we finally return to the Cathedral, and the mission Return to the Cathedral. Undoubtedly the most balls to the walls horror experience in the game. I still find this mission genuinely frightening at times. Our goal here is just to grab the eye and get out, but nothing's ever that simple for Garrett.
Now that you have attained your prize, can you escape with your skin?
After nabbing the eye, the front door locks on us and we've got to find another way out. The atmosphere in this level is downright oppressive. There's not a hint of light anywhere in this cathedral, and while having lots of darkness to hide is usually a boon, it doesn't feel comforting in this case. This area exemplifies the soundtrack's ability to hide amongst in-game sounds. You hear whispers, moans, either the rattling of chains or the clinking of coins into a collection box. Not sure what's preferable. It's not just the cathedral you explore, but the entirety of the cathedral grounds. It's all been abandoned for some time, and it shows. In order to escape, we'll need an explosive from the armory. What, your church doesn't have an armory? Good luck Deus vaulting yourself out of a ghost situation. Tell your parishioner to get on that. A helpful ghost with a hilariously out-of-place voice actor agrees to help us out, but in exchange we've got to take care of some things for him.
Thou canst start by collecting some things for me. All brothers have rosary beads, so thou'lt need some too. Thou canst borrow mine.
There's a pretty sizable list of tasks for us in this level, and it's rarely as simple as stealing something. For example, we've got to bring him a blessed Hammerite icon. Because there's no more in the church, we have to create our own from a mold. Then we need to sanctify it by dipping it in a lunar pool. You know, what good will a holy symbol do at this point, man? You're already dead. What are you warding off? I should be warding you off. There's a lot of running all around the place here and some mandatory backtracking if you don't know what you're looking for. Even though this mission isn't the longest, it always feels longest to me. It's stressful enough being in the midst of these supernatural enemies which have some really unpredictable behavior and lots of health. So the fact that you're required to head back into some areas multiple times to find objects, drag bodies out, or kill certain enemies means you savor every moment you're in safety. I suppose that's the point of this area though, making you feel scared and stressed, so arguably it does succeed. What I'm missing at this point is the the feeling of being a thief. At least with the Lost City or the Bonehoard, you're still creeping around and treasure hunting. The Cathedral has us running around in a perpetual state of vulnerability. This mission, like most with the horror tone, is divisive. Some people love it because the atmosphere is unapologetically Thief 1. Others feel that it amounts to a lot of busy work and not a lot of sneaking. There's a fair amount of lore here. The Hammerites are humanized in a way that we haven't seen yet, and there are a lot of interesting documents scattered around. I especially like the climax of this level, where Garrett performs a ritual in order to allow these ghosts to rest. In my case, Garrett was running in circles trying to avoid zombies while casually reciting scripture.
O Master Hunter, we ask thee to bless our brother who hath died in thy service. Forgive him the transgression of his living days, and look with favor on his works in thy name. Come and play and fire and...
It was quite a sight. With the eye in hand, the story can finally move along. We bring it back to Constantine, who promptly double-crosses us, revealing himself to be the trickster reincarnated. Garrett's eye is plucked out and merged with the eye. That is, the other eye, which creates a portal to the trickster's realm. This is a pretty terrifying cutscene.
My poor Mr. Garrett, you will not live to see the sprawling glory of it. Your sacrifice is not yet complete. 9 lilacs and 9 thistleblades must feed and die. Stands he then in the greens and fested maw, and speeds he out his judgments upon the weeps and writhing man-folds.
Cynical and aloof Garrett lying on the floor trembling in pain and terror is a really strong visual. If he's losing it, I guess I probably should too. As Garrett lays there bound in vines, a pair of keepers arrives to free him. Seems like they've been watching him, believing him to be part of some larger plot, but they escape before there's a chance to learn more. This mission is called Escape, and if you ask me, it's the worst in the game by a country mile. We're introduced to pagan enemies like the Monkey Men. They're frustrating to deal with, and the layout of this level gives me a headache. There's no rhythm to it at all. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of the pagan realm merging with the city and creating an alien landscape, but this just sucks. I usually run through it as quickly as possible, throwing caution to the wind and dealing with the consequences. The penultimate mission is called Strange Bedfellows, in which Garrett heads back to the Hammer Cathedral in order to forge an uneasy alliance. You see what I did there? Forge? Forge an uneasy alliance? Hammer? Huh? The only problem is that all of those crazy pagan monsters stop by to kill every last Hammerite. A small part of this mission involves moving through Hammer headquarters, which we've already done, but the bulk of this mission takes place in a new area hidden underground. It's about as middle of the road as missions get in this series. I don't know if it's my own perception getting in the way of things, but I think there's just something fundamentally unfun about these pagan enemies. The spiders are just annoying. They're difficult to hit, it's impossible to know whether they see you or not, and they use projectile attacks that bind you in place and kill you. The Monkey Men move really erratically. They're unpredictable and travel in groups. I'm pretty sure they've got heightened senses and they don't shut the fuck up.
Fear the cat. Hey. Keepers, now you die.
Finally, there's these Bugmen. They're usually placed in areas where sneaking makes a lot of noise, so you've either got to take them out from a distance or use up your moss arrows. They're very difficult to kill and have some annoying projectiles, so like the late Roman Empire, I just go full pagan holocaust. And like the late Roman Empire, it usually doesn't go very well. I seek and destroy every enemy I can in these levels. The problem is that in Strange Bedfellows, you can't kill the Bugmen. You can't even knock them unconscious. If you do, a new objective pops up that requires you kill all of them. What this amounts to is that you can't play the way you want anymore, and that might be my issue with these last few missions of the game. All of the enemies have specific strategies that work on them, and it becomes tiresome having to obey a new set of rules when up until recently, you were the one who made the rules. If I wanted to stand on stage at the opera and strip naked, that was my God-given right as an American citizen. You do so much as take your pants off in front of these crap guys, they start snapping their claws together, threatening to circumcise you. Some people are bound to disagree. They love these late game levels, but I can't relate. This is a part of the game I'm never keen to revisit. On top of all the things I've mentioned, there's no loot in this level, no thievery, the thing that's in the name of the game. So we've got to sneak past some enemies and rescue the Hammerite priest. Another carry the unconscious body objective, but the level is mercifully short compared to Cragscleft, where we had to haul Basso across the entirety of the prison. After delivering the body, the Hammerites and Garrett formulate a plan to stop the trickster, who's entered his realm through a transitionary area called the Maw of Chaos. There he plans to use the eye for a ritual that'll open a massive portal where his army of stupid monkeys and dumbass crabmen will come to destroy the city. We've got a replica eye, which Garrett plans on swapping out before the ritual takes place. It's rigged to explode, so hopefully it'll disrupt the ritual and kill the trickster. Why would you even worship a god that can just be killed with a small explosion? Where's the divinity in that? I mean, with the builder, he's arguably just some kind of symbol manifested as a person, so you can't kill him. I maintain that if a prospector with some TNT can accidentally kill your god, it probably shouldn't be revered. This last level is a quick one. It has you contending with some themed challenge areas before reaching the trickster. Speeding through these pipes is a good time, and they could probably make an entire game out of this ice sliding thing. So while the trickster's back is turned, we swap the eye out. There's nothing left to do but watch the fireworks as Garrett saves the world. A particularly nice cutscene shows Garrett, dismissive as ever, talking with a keeper who tries to convince him of his significance in the keeper prophecies. Garrett's new mechanical eye peers around, and we're given a foreshadowing for what will become Thief 2: The Metal Age as some gloriously late 90s industrial rock plays. And that's a wrap. So what do I think of Thief? I think it's a masterpiece. And an important video game. It actually astonishes me just how much Thief gets right without having anyone else's homework to copy. Not that there weren't stealth games, but nothing like this. The level design, game world, and individual mechanics were so innovative. In a time when games were trying to catch up with novels and movies in terms of storytelling, Thief boldly went off in its own direction, setting a uniquely dark tone and pioneering in-game storytelling methods that are still used to this day, oftentimes not even as effectively. The emphasis on lighting and directional audio to create the stealth experience set a standard that arguably still hasn't been met. In so many modern stealth games, you're allowed to see enemies or points of interest through walls, but Thief doesn't need to do that. It already gives you enough sensory information to plan ahead, and that's what makes it such an immersive experience. An immersive simulation, if you will. Games like Thief prove that killing hundreds of bad guys isn't all there is to a first-person game. Sometimes successfully navigating vulnerable situations is just as rewarding as a headshot. Though it's admittedly not perfect and its sequels would provide a more even-keeled experience, the Dark Project's experimental nature and general weirdness would make for some of the highest highs in the series, if not some lows as well. Thief is one of my favorite games, and a lot of my non-Thief favorite games owe something to Thief. Sometimes it's hard to adjust your expectations and play an older game, but Thief fits like a tailored suit. Its graphics have aged, but its bones are as strong as ever, and its endocrine system pumps me full of sweet, sweet endorphins every time Eric Barosius' masterful soundtrack starts playing. If you feel intimidated by the idea of playing an older game, I say just give it a try. Turn the lights out, throw on some headphones, and be surprised when you realize it's already been 4 hours. Hell, I just played every level multiple times for this review, and I could still hop back in and give the Opera House another shot. If you've never played it, play it now. If you have played it, reinstall it right now and play it again. You know you want to. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd like to extend a special thanks to my friend Dave Ward, a very talented musician who listened to the entire soundtrack with no context and shared his insight. The soundtrack is such a big part of Thief, and being able to combine our thoughts made the process of writing about it easier for me. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for making it until the end of this video. If you liked it and want more, please consider liking and subscribing for further content. You can also follow me on social media if you want to see what I'm up to, or offer me suggestions on which content to cover next. Continue with Looking Glass Studios catalog, do more convoluted Japanese RPGs, stealth games in general. I'm always open to hearing what the people want, and as always, I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.